All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our RBT exam practice question series, where we're going through the next set of practice questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in our Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get to our questions. Question 1. Tony is riding in the backseat of the car. Car's air conditioner is broken and it is hot, so Tony asks his friend to roll down his window to let cool air inside the car. What is the primary function of this behavior? Now, let's think about this very carefully. What is Tony doing prior to having the window rolled down? We know he's riding in the car. We know the air conditioner is broken and it is hot. So he asks his friend to let cool air inside the car. And by letting cool air inside the car, what is Tony achieving? A, is he escaping anything? Well, he is. He's escaping the heat. By rolling down the window and letting the cool air inside, Tony has escaped the heat. Tony is doing this to escape the heat. B, tangible. Well, Tony's not actually obtaining anything. He's not obtaining a tangible object, so it isn't tangible. Don't be fooled, right, by tangible. All Tony did was ask his friend to roll down the window so he could get rid of the heat. He didn't obtain anything. He also didn't get attention. He wasn't seeking his friend's attention. He needed his friend to do something for him. And then D, automatic. This behavior would be automatic if what? If Tony had rolled his own window down, this behavior would have been automatic. Remember, automatic is when you do something by yourself or a person does something by themselves, which is reinforcing or punishing, right? There's no social mediation involved. But since there's a second person involved, it can't be automatic. So the only function that makes sense here is escape. Tony's in the hot car. He needs to escape from the heat. So he asks his friend to roll the window down to let the cool air inside the car. The primary function of this behavior is escape. That's more of a tricky question. So if you got it right, fantastic. If not, that's okay. Review it and understand why we've picked escape. Mason wants to decrease the number of occurrences for 2 target behaviors. What would you not recommend Mason use to achieve this objective? So if it was up to you, and Mason asked you, I need to decrease 2 target behaviors, what would you not recommend? A, extinction. Would you recommend extinction to decrease behavior? Sure, extinction is a great, effective procedure at reducing behaviors. What about B, positive punishment? Again, absolutely, right? Punishment is great for reducing target behaviors. Same with C, negative punishment. And what about D, non-contingent reinforcement? Now, just because we have non-contingent and not positive or negative doesn't change the fact that non-contingent reinforcement is still reinforcement. Non-contingent reinforcement is still meant to increase behavior. So if we want to decrease something, we would never use reinforcement. So the one thing you would never recommend Mason do is use reinforcement. So in this case, you would not recommend D, non-contingent reinforcement, to achieve his objective of reducing the number of occurrences for target behaviors. A 13-year-old boy with an intellectual disability wants to learn how to shower by himself. Your supervising behavior analyst asks you to write out a list of steps for showering based on your own routine. What has the analyst asked you to do? All right, another one. Let's be careful here. We have a 13-year-old boy, and he wants to learn how to shower. Your job, according to your analyst, is to write out a list of steps for showering based on your own routine. So what are you doing here? Are you A, task chaining? You're not. Remember, the task chain is what we teach. Task chaining, forward chaining, backward chaining is the teaching method we use. Prior to the chain, the creation of the chain, the writing out of the steps is called what? Well, that's the task analysis. Before we can implement the task chain and teach the task chain, we have to analyze the behavior and make a list of steps, which is exactly what you're doing. Are you C, probing? No, because you're not probing the boy, right? You're looking at your own routine and analyzing that task. And then D, write a treatment plan. Well, you're behavior analysts or your supervisor should never ask you to write a treatment plan. Of course, that is not the role of the RBT. They've simply asked you to observe yourself during your showering routine and write out the steps. Essentially, they said analyze your showering task. So, what has the analyst asked you to do? Be a task analysis. You will then take those list of steps and start to teach a task chain. Your husband tends to leave the bag of food open whenever he feeds the dog, which causes the food to go stale. Now, when he closes the bag, you give him a hug, but when he doesn't, you do not hug him. What type of procedure is this? All right, we've got a good old differential reinforcement procedure question. What is differential reinforcement? We are reinforcing one behavior, putting other behaviors on extinction. In this case, what behavior are we reinforcing? Well, we're reinforcing closing the bag by a hug. We are putting not closing the bag on extinction, right? So what type of procedure would that be? A, differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. Now, you are teaching him an alternative behavior, right? Instead of leaving the bag open, you want him to close it. But you have to ask yourself when debating between DRA and DRI, you have to ask yourself, is the replacement behavior incompatible with the old behavior? In this case, it definitely is. You can't leave the bag open and also close the bag. Those two do not work together. These are incompatible behaviors. So although DRA and DRI both teach new behaviors, DRI teaches behaviors that are incompatible with the old behavior. DRD and DRL are types of differential reinforcement, but they're not necessarily ones you must know. DRD and DRL, we're decreasing the rate at which behavior happens. We're lessening the amount of behavior occurring. But with this, we want to completely replace the behavior, okay? So if you're teaching replacement behaviors, it must be DRA and DRI. And in this case, the replacement behavior is incompatible, so it has to be DRI. It has to be a differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviors procedure. Each morning, you put 2 Eggo waffles in your toaster for breakfast. This morning, you followed your normal routine, but the toaster would not get hot. You attempt several more times until you finally just eat cereal instead. Attempting to use the toaster multiple times was most likely what? So we're looking at your behavior of using the toaster multiple times. So what is happening when you're using the toaster? Well, usually you just put the toast or the Eggo in the toaster and it toasts. Great. This morning, however, the toaster's not getting hot. So you try over and over and over and over again, right? Because you're so used to receiving the reinforcement of your toasted Eggo waffle. This morning, you didn't get that reinforcement. So your behavior is what? Well, it's on extinction now. Now, it's asking about using the toaster multiple times. So it's not asking about what's causing it, all right? We're not talking about A, extinction. We're not talking about B, spontaneous recovery, because spontaneous recovery occurs once extinction has already occurred or happened. What we're talking about is C, an extinction burst. We've put these Eggo waffles in the toaster every morning and received reinforcement. This morning, we've received no reinforcement. So what do? We go through this extinction burst where we try and try and try again until finally we hit our wall and we stop. So our behavior is indicative of an extinction burst. And then D, positive punishment. It isn't positive punishment because our reinforcement has been withheld. When reinforcement is withheld, that is extinction. Don't mix up extinction and punishment. They're two very different ideas. Attempting to use a toaster multiple times was most likely an extinction burst as a result of extinction from the toaster. You're discussing a client that you share with another technician. The technician tells you that the first thing they look at in behavior is how the behavior looks, since that is the most important thing to consider for behavior change. Would you agree with this statement? So would you agree with the technician's idea that how the behavior looks is the most important thing? Well, I hope not. The behavior looks like, what do we call that? When we refer to what the behavior looks like? Well, we're talking about topography, right? And so A, yes, topography is the most important thing to consider for behavior change. Well, we know that's not correct. Okay, we know topography is not at all the most important thing to consider. The most important thing to consider is what? Well, the function. So what you should say, or what you would say is, no, I don't agree with this statement. The function is the most important thing to consider for behavior change. B is how you should think about behavior change. C, maybe it depends on the behavior. Again, the function is always more important than topography. The topography helps us, but the function tells us why that behavior occurs. And then D, not enough information. Well, we have enough information. This technician told you topography is the most important. You would disagree and say, well, no, the function is the most important thing to consider for behavior change. Jake usually takes several minutes to respond to his mom whenever she texts him. However, he will respond to his girlfriend immediately when she texts him. What is changing in this scenario relative to texting? We're talking about some sort of dimension of texting, right? And we're looking at things like inter-response time, duration, rate, and latency. So in the first scenario, Jake's mom texts him and he takes a long time to respond. In the second scenario, his girlfriend texts him, he texts immediately. So if texting, right, if receiving that text is the SD and texting is the response, what is changing? A, inter-response time. Well, not necessarily, right? We're not looking at length of time in between texting mom and texting girlfriend. What we're looking at is length of time in between receiving the text, the SD, and the response of texting. So B, duration. Duration is the length of the response, right? So maybe how long it takes him to send one text. But again, we're looking at SD to response, the time in between. Rate, we're not looking at frequency. So we're looking at D, latency. The latency of mom texting to responding to mom is very high. The latency of girlfriend texting responding to girlfriend is very low. It's the time in between that SD and that first response. What is changing in the scenario relative to texting? Well, D, latency. You've taken data for 10 sessions on how many times your client screams when asked a question. Your data is broken down by screams per hour. If you had to graph this data, where would you put your sessions? Now, when we're talking about graphing, right, we have our x-axis and our y-axis. What goes on the x-axis? What goes on the x-axis is time, right? Days, hours, sessions, years. The y-axis holds our behavior. So if you have to graph this data that you've taken on 10 sessions, your behavior is what? Your behavior is screams per hour. So we're going to put that on our y-axis. You have 10 sessions. You're going to put 10 sessions of passage of time where? Well, on the x-axis. So again, this is something you just kind of need to know, right? X-axis is where our time goes. Y-axis is where behavior goes. Baseline is what we consider our data prior to intervention. And then the data path is your actual path that you connect your data with, right? So both C and D are not relevant to our answer. What is relevant is where you would put sessions, and you put it on time, which is A, the x-axis. Excellent. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. Like, subscribe, let us know when you pass so we can include you in our Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.